Welcome to AutoRetro, a podcast where we talk to people, guests if you will, David, about the cars of their lives.
We do indeed, Ed.
And who do we have on tonight? I'm Ed Bunting.
Oh.
You're David Prince.
And I'm David Prince. And tonight we've got with us a special guest.
So special, in fact, that you're going to read some pre-prepared
I want to get this
comments.
right, okay? So tonight we have with us a man who has had many feathers in his cap, okay? So he's been a restaurateur.
But he's not wearing a hat.
He's not wearing a hat now, it's too hot. He's been a restaurateur. He's been... his current business card says the Sports and Classics Specialist for Porsche Centre Melbourne.
Which is not nothing.
Not nothing indeed.
That's something.
He's one half of the Motorists YouTube channel.
It's true.
He has an encyclopedic knowledge of classic Alfa Romeo and Porsche cars. And when I say encyclopedic, I mean multi-volume.
We mean encyclopedic.
We're talking old school Britannia here. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Benny Musu.
Thanks for having me.
Hello, Benny.
Thanks for inviting me along.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I'm
What
glad
a
you
great
said
pleasure.
yes.
What a great pleasure.
Thank you for coming, Benny, on such a
You're
hot
more than
and
welcome.
steamy night.
It's a great pleasure.
Excellent.
Now, we could fill, I reckon, 20 podcasts
We probably could.
with Benny Musu's stories, anecdotes, knowledge, and general car tomfoolery.
You're too kind.
But we're only going to do one. And so we're going to drill in on a few things,
Indeed.
as we always do. We want to take you right back, Benny, back to your
Right
first... And David will interject with questions and comments, of course, as we go along. But we want to go right
That
back
works.
to the start of your first car memory.
Wow. As a matter of fact, I think I probably remember it.
There you go.
And it was poignant.
I'm sure it was.
Settle in, listeners.
Settle in. Where were we? Because we may not have been in Australia, I'm guessing.
No, I'll paint a picture. I was born in Malta, a small island in the Mediterranean, and a car country. Probably because there are too many of them. There's too many cars in Malta. Anybody who's ever been there knows it's the fifth most densely populated country in the world.
So
Parking
is
is hell.
Yeah,
Is it fair to say cars per capita high?
very high.
So a typical family would have not just one car.
Well, they might have two, but part of the problem is the culture of, you live at home until you get married, you build another house, you move out. So you could have, as a mum and dad, you could have 2 or 3 children that live at home that all have cars.
Yeah.
And one of my earliest memories was my father and my uncle swearing about not being able to park a car or not wanting to go out because they'd lose their parking space. Right? And that's
Yes.
part of the culture there.
Yeah.
But
See a car.
the
Buy,
very-
quick, buy a car. Buy a car.
the definitive thing about my memories as a small child in Malta, I didn't come to Australia until I was 5 years old, and I've been back a lot. So my memories revolve around a couple of specific cars because my dad and my uncles were obviously my childhood chauffeurs.
Of course.
And the very first car that I have a conscious memory of riding in as a kid and having some, tactile connection to was my father's Alfasud.
Oh, he had a Sud.
Okay.
He had a Sud.
Now, this is a Sud, for the listeners at home, 2-door and 4-door.
Correct.
And this was a
4-door.
4-door. Family edition Sud.
Correct. And there's a couple of interesting things on this point because obviously anybody who knows me knows that I've gone on to become a complete Alfa Romeo tragedy in the best possible way.
Yeah.
But
It's beginning to make sense.
what I found out only recently was that Malta put its own Alfasuds together.
Really?
Wow.
They built
On the
them there.
island.
We actually had a car factory in Malta which built Alfasuds.
Wow.
It built a lot of BMC product, and I think it built some French cars like 16s.
Wow.
Really?
For the
Okay.
Maltese market and to be exported to other places like Cyprus. But that's an
Okay.
aside.
Okay.
So my earliest
Cool
memories,
aside.
my earliest car memories, apart from seeing them in the streets, which was everywhere,
Yeah.
was my dad's Alfasud, my dad's blue 16,
Ooh.
Hello.
my uncle's yellow, and Ed, you'll know the name of the colour, but he had a 17.
Yeah.
Yep.
Possibly sunburst yellow. Although, see, a lot of the Australian colours that I know on 70s Renaults and 60s Renaults were only in Australia.
Aussie production.
Like
Track
that track
yellow.
yellow one that
Yeah.
I've got was an Aussie only colour.
Oh, wow.
So they did, it might be a slightly different yellow over there.
And then, finally, with talking about cars and Malta, was that because we left in '82, but over the course of the '80s we went back a couple of times, and on one visit, my dad's youngest brother took me out for a drive in what was for Malta an extremely extravagant car, which he didn't even want to tell his own parents about.
That's a true car enthusiast when you don't tell mum and dad you bought something. Yeah.
And again, you'll know the name of the colour more than likely, but it was a pale blue Citroen CX.
Ooh,
a CX.
Lovely. Yeah.
I don't know the name of the colour.
Okay.
But lovely car.
The point of the thing was, though, even today...
Something blue.
Today... Nowadays, in 2022, if you put somebody in front of a French car from the 70s or the 80s, even they are astonished by the shape of the instruments and the styling, where things are, and rotating barrel instruments and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Imagine what it was like as a kid.
Yes,
I remember my friend from primary school, Gabriel, his dad was big into Citroens, and the first exposure I had to one was a DS, and it had the headlights that it must have been a Palace, I think. Palace. It turned with the steering, and I remember him showing me that, the dad, and I was just like, what the? I was thinking, my dad's car doesn't do that. That's a lot newer than this. You know?
But the one thing I'll finish with my earliest exposure to cars, especially in Malta, and not just as a kid, as I say, when we went back, was the overwhelming connection with them, with this particular brand, riding in them, looking at them. One of my uncles was a very enthusiastic tinkerer. Yeah. And he tinkered for others as well, because they brought him their broken Fiats. Yes. And Fiats have remained with me because...
Was his name Tony?
In Malta... Stop it. If you can appreciate, Malta is about 90 miles south of the bottom of Sicily, about 90 miles north of the tip of Tunisia. It's in the middle of the Mediterranean, so we got cars from everywhere. But Fiats were, and still are, very prevalent cars. They've always sold in good numbers, not just the very small ones, but everything from the range. Yep. And my earliest memories of going fast in cars as a passenger was in various Fiats. And seeing engines out of cars and understanding how they came apart and to a certain extent went back together, that really stuck with me.
Wow.
And it's probably the worst car you can have in a Mediterranean environment, isn't it? And Fiats and Alfas.
Yeah, I'm guessing there are not many sort of.
They do have a propensity to rust. We know that, but it's probably put them near the sea as well. Not great.
No, it's a bad combination.
They really probably should have had Range Rovers or something aluminium, maybe.
Plausible. Yeah.
Rover P6s.
Rover P6s. I'm talking.
In the heat.
I'm talking
That'd be great,
crap.
but
move along.
Move along.
Next.
So that was earliest. You came here when you were 5. Obviously, with those
5.
memories still pretty strong.
Very, and I remember distinctly, we landed in Melbourne in, I think, May 1982, and the cars that I remember, one of the things as a 5-year-old car enthusiast was I was seeing all these things I'd never seen before.
Yeah.
But not just the Australian stuff. I mean, the cars that we saw when we came here were colossal. They were enormous.
Yeah.
But we also saw lots and lots of Japanese cars, which were not something you saw much of there.
You never got that there.
So I remember the first car that my father bought, and you'll love this.
So he's landed, he says, my family's in a new country, I need a car.
Again, you'll know more about it than I do, but the first car my father bought was, I remember it distinctly, it was a kind of metallic dark red. It had a manual gearbox, and it was a Mazda 626 of the time, so very early 80s, and it was new.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And it backfired all the time, which I thought was fantastic. But it was even
you thought
now,
this is just like the Fiat. This is a wonderful oral note.
And my mother had a green Datsun 260C.
Oh,
see, that's a huge car
for the time. With something I'd never seen before, electric windows.
Whoa, mama.
Wow.
So whilst I haven't pursued a life of obtaining Japanese cars, or even really having much to do with them, those memories stick with me very, very much.
Yeah. And that in 1982, that 260C, David, would have been, 4, 5, 6 years old?
I think so.
Yep.
Something like that.
76.
And the Mazda was brand spanker.
Mm-hmm.
So that would have been the old 626. Oh, no, it would have been the new shape, the front drive?
No. It was
rear.
drive.
So it's the older squarish.
They were released.
Yep. They were very refined cars, those early Mazdas, in a lot of ways, but they did blow smoke quite prematurely. I remember driving in a friend's one in the 90s. My friend's dad had one, drove us to school a few times, and thinking, Gosh, and so that was like a 1982 or 3 Mazda 626, and this would have been 92 or 3. So it wasn't that old. It was only 10 years old. But I remember thinking still how quiet and refined it was.
Yeah.
Maybe because my dad at the time had a diesel. But I just remember riding in it and going, wow, this is quite quiet.
If your father having a diesel car in Australia in the early 80s would have been a pioneer.
No, not in the 80s, in the 90s.
Oh, in the 90s, still a pioneer.
Yeah. No, it was a diesel 4-wheel drive. There was a lot of those getting
yeah,
around by then.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, but that I think cemented my love of diesel engines, you know, and just that it's a very comforting note, you know.
Yeah, okay.
A lot of people
One word for it.
Very comforting.
I like it.
Those
Anyway.
626s, though, it's interesting you chose that because that was one of the Mazda's sort of real first attempt to make a contemporary styled, something European-ish looking car.
It's true.
They were very
because
simple, basically,
but
simple design.
If you said, for example, if you took the badges off that car and replaced them with something European, it was credible. They were styled to be international.
And I often
cars.
love using that exact line, you know, it's a very good litmus test for is a car
put
this
the hand
or
over
this.
the badge. That's
Exactly.
right, yeah.
Well, and that's the other thing. I think one of my great car sub passions is styling. And if you talk about, you know, Mazda paid Bertoni a lot of money,
Of course.
over a few decades for designs, and some of which were actually destined to have gone to places like Alfa Romeo, like the
That's
the
right,
Mazda
the
1500, I was going to mention
Yes.
it. Yep.
which was the Mazda Luce in some markets.
Yeah.
And I recently saw one on Marketplace for sale that someone very clever had screwed an Alfa Romeo shield to, which is your case in point.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right.
Oh, that car, the 1500, is totally believable as a Italian.
Oh, yeah, you can see
They
it.
were the
Absolutely.
first truly international cars. They were designed to be marketed across the globe, and in some cases it was successful.
Yep.
So you came here, you had the 626 and the 260C. Which was your favourite out of those two?
I have no idea, because it was all clouded by
Right.
the arrival
Mm.
when I was, I don't know, I must have been 6 or 7 by the time my father turned up. And I don't know whether it was new or recently pre-owned, but it was a blue Volvo 244 GLE.
GLE. Hello. Dad's worked hard. He didn't just get the DL.
No. And it had those magnificently styled 5-spoke
The
alloy
alloys.
wheels.
Yes, I
Beautiful.
love
Yep.
them.
And it had, there were a number of things about that car that I remember even today. And I'm serious when I say, if somebody closes the door of a 200 series Volvo within a kilometre,
That's right. That's exactly right.
my ears.
You're like, I know that. They were very distinctive cars.
They were distinctive cars, and that was then succeeded by, and it was a great disappointment, which we heard about all the time, the Volvo 740 GL.
Oh, okay. And he didn't like
the
that.
740.
No, because it was not even a patch on the 244.
Yeah.
Not a patch.
Right.
But that did
I hope he
stick
didn't go
out
on
in
and
my
buy an
memory.
850. He would have even been more disappointed.
Well,
Well,
what
no,
about
I
the
thought
little
they were really
GLT? What were they? The
Yeah, 360 GLT.
Oh, the 360.
360 GLT, yeah.
And I remember distinctly that my part of my childhood literature was many car brochures.
Yep.
Mazda, Volvo, and for the fleeting time, and I'm so disappointed as an adult that my dad never went through with the purchase of a Saab, because we had a lot of Saab literature around
lying
the
about
house.
the house.
Yeah.
That might have been deliberate from you to sort of, while you're having your morning coffee,
Well,
Dad,
it
have a
worked for you,
read.
didn't it?
Have a
It
read
worked
of
for you.
this.
It was one of the catalysts for me starting to try and understand what engines were, because the remember as a kid you'd see things and you'd not have a clue really what they meant, but you know that they implied something.
Oh, you mean like the badge linking to the
16
engine?
valve.
Yes.
What is that?
What is that?
Yeah.
It must have been good because there was a badge that declared
That's right.
it.
They're promoting it.
And that was a big part of my...
Wow.
I remember my
early
dad had a
40s.
Fairlane new in '86, a ZL, I think it was in '86. Anyway, it had EFI on the side, and so as kids we called it was kind of apt. We called the car Effie, which was kind of like maybe a sort of a Fairlane buy. It was Effie.
Effie.
And as history has shown us, it wasn't that far off the mark.
It's not that far off the mark, but yeah, I remember thinking, what's Effie, and trying to work that out.
Okay, so moving on, we've had a Volvo.
This was Dad's car.
These were Dad's.
Yeah,
cars.
no,
I was
that's right.
far
That's what I
too-
mean.
Far too young. Look, there was a turning point. Obviously, there was a big turning point in my life, and I remember it like it was yesterday.
Like an epiphany.
Like an epiphany. We spent the first few years in Australia living here in Melbourne, and then we moved to Canberra. And when we arrived after a couple of years in Canberra, and I remember this so distinctly because it was a really big thing in my life, but my dad, and I don't really remember how it came about or whatever the case may be, but the bottom line was my dad finished up with a Dino 246 GT.
Now I'm just gonna sit with that for a second.
Yeah.
So we've had the Mazda 626, the 260C, a Volvo. We're getting up there, you know.
Yep. A 740.
A 740, another Volvo makes sense.
Yep. Ooh,
And then you go to
Canberra.
Canberra. Canberra's not known for being the most exciting town in Australia.
It was when I was there.
With a 246, absolutely. Bloody hell.
That's right.
How did that come about?
Well, to be honest, I really don't remember. And it had
Did he just come home with that?
No, he didn't. No, it's not so much that he just showed up with it. I'm sure there was a preamble, but I was an
Followed me home,
8-year-old,
can I keep it?
9-year-old kid. You know, I didn't really keep up with the politics of.
No. But
I didn't.
But
know a
did
thing
he
about
say,
it.
son, I bought a Ferrari and I'm bringing it home tonight?
He didn't, because he wasn't that kind of guy. But the only thing that really sticks out in my memory is, as you can imagine, being a kid and being a passenger in a car that had a 65-degree V6 behind the occupants,
yes,
with 3 Webers. It made a noise that I'd never heard before.
Yeah.
Yep.
It was, and you know what? In latter years, having driven Dinos, they're not fast, but it felt that way.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
And
compared to a Volvo 240 GLE.
Yeah, but the tactile, the whole tactile thing about the car, everything about that car as a kid formed. It must have chiseled a new wee chapter in my brain, because everything that car stood for is what set me off into my motoring future.
But it's not that far removed from the Fiats and the Alfas.
No.
No, that's right.
It's,
not at all.
it's kind of like you've had that real early on, then there's been some more plain Jane stuff, and then, hang on, at a seminal age, here's another jab with it.
There must have been another car in the family, because they seat 2 last time I checked.
Yeah, well, we had. I remember that this whole period was kind of, the Volvos were there. Those 2 Volvos were part of this period.
Yep.
And
They made it up to Canberra. They made it up to Canberra. They got up there.
My dad's cars were quite formative for many reasons, right? Because then, when we left Canberra, and I'm not going to get into the backstory, but we went to live in a very small place in the Riverina called Narrandera.
I have heard of Narrandera.
Yep. Now, you can call this integration, you can call it whatever you like, but I distinctly remember my father coming home with a brand new, what was it, a Ford XF Falcon in jonquil yellow.
Oh, wow.
Now, when you hear the term or the phrase over-promise and under-deliver, this was absolutely the other way around, because my poor dad, I don't know what possessed him to buy this car, other than the fact that we lived in country New South Wales, and it might have been that he wanted to not look ridiculous driving a Volvo in a country town, the Riverina.
What about the 246? Did he still have that?
That was gone.
Oh, that was gone.
But this jonquil yellow Falcon, I reckon it might have gone back to the dealership once a week for the duration of the ownership.
Yeah.
And I don't think there was actually anything wrong with it. I mean, by the standards of Ford of the
Right.
time.
Yeah.
And
That
it
was
had a
standard
sticker.
warranty.
It had a sticker on the rear window that I'll never forget, declaring that it had won an Australian Design Award. To my eyes as a 9-year-old, I
you thought,
couldn't work
what
out.
part of it has won this design
Outrageous.
award?
That's right.
Yeah. The Dino Design Award.
Yes,
You know.
there was no design awards around at the time.
The Ford, no, not
Yeah,
Design Award.
no.
Yeah.
And then
John Cooliello, of course, looking much more special on a Zampatti Laser.
I see.
One of
Now
the
looking
3
back, that's a
colours.
hell of a colour.
with
I know,
the
I
alloys
know.
with the 4 big.
Yep.
Lovely.
That colour, and remember the ad on the TAC ad in the 90s? I think it was, Darren, look out!
Yeah.
You know, and there was that bright yellow XF Falcon.
Yep.
That colour, yeah, I like it.
And by this stage, presumably you want me to tell you more.
Oh, absolutely more.
Of course.
So this was Narrandera. We've gone a bit safe with Dad's cars. We haven't even got onto your first car yet. We will.
But what I remember then is that we made our way to Perth, sunny Perth in Western Australia. And one of the Volvos made it there. The 740 made it. The 740.
You mentioned them all lining up. All right, everyone got their packed lunch.
Actually-
Yes. Let's see who
True,
gets
actually,
there.
here, true matter-of-fact memory.
Yeah.
We actually crossed the Nullarbor in the 740.
Well, that's
Remember that?
that's a cool
It
trip.
was silver with blue velour, so the blue
Oh,
velour.
acres.
Yep.
Narrandera.
You would have been comfy.
Oh, yeah.
Mm.
And Perth was, and my memories of growing up and becoming a teenager were kind of, my dad had a W102 230E.
See, now he's come on song with the family car.
Yeah. And that stuck out in my memory a lot.
Yeah.
We had a lot of, I say a lot, we never had a lot of cars. My dad wasn't really a car enthusiast. But the cars, like, I guess anybody who's, a self-proclaimed car enthusiast will always remember the cars that they got ferried around in.
Yeah,
of course.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess that then when my teenage years were upon me, the first cars that I actually drove were, for the most part, Volkswagens.
This is what Mum and Dad had, or was this what you bought?
No, this is, I didn't buy one. I actually had a girlfriend that had one.
Even better.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what was that car? The first one you drove on your own license?
Yeah, I remember it distinctly. It had been chopped into a faux cabriolet. But the important part was that it had a 1600 twin port.
Yep.
It started life as what they call in Europe a 1302.
Yep.
Superbug.
McPherson
with the
strut front
elephant
end.
foot tail lights.
No,
that's
that's a
1303.
1303.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Close.
So Super Beetle twin port 1600, and to whatever I was in years, I was a licensed driver. It felt fast.
Yeah.
Yep.
I wish it wasn't.
No, but
They sounded.
But they
fast.
sound good.
fast.
They're quite torquey motors.
They were, and then, but the first car that I owned, and I mean, I want to say the first car that I taught myself how to drive in properly.
Yeah.
Was a Fiat 124 sedan.
Nice.
And I bought it
Yep.
for $650
In Perth.
in Fremantle, from a car yard in Fremantle.
Yep.
And I remember it distinctly because it had a pushrod 1200cc engine as they did. And apart from learning how to drive this car, I also taught myself some fundamental stuff like resetting valve clearances and all sorts of things. And then one very enthusiastic afternoon in the rain, it decided to drop a valve.
Ooh.
Right.
And back in those days must have been the early or the mid-90s or something. I can't remember exactly. It was the late 90s it must have been. The most economical way to fix a dropped valve in a Fiat 124 was to put a different engine in it.
Oh, you don't just pull the head off and resurface and revalve and put back on?
Oh, well, that would have been too easy.
Dollars.
Yeah, dollars. So I remember I bought a Fiat 131 which had a 1600 pushrod engine in it.
Super Mirafiori.
Well, Mirafiori, because the Supers were twin cams, but that's another story. Anyway,
we told you he knows a lot about engines, didn't we? We said that.
This car came with this, and I can't remember how much I paid for it, but I suspect it was more than I paid for the 124. But the 131 gave its alloy wheels and its 1600 pushrod engine to the 124.
Yes.
And over the course of, I can't remember how long it was, this car sort of metamorphosised into something slightly more exotic than it was when I first bought it. But I distinctly remember the increase in torque with the 1600 sort of meant that I could steer it on the throttle in the rain.
Yeah.
Nice.
And that car was magnificent because it had that DNA. To me, every Italian car is in some way a sporting car.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was what made me enthusiastic about it. I loved that thing. I loved it.
And it's
need to do another one.
When you don't have you do. When you don't have a lot of money and but you're full of energy and enthusiasm, but there's and I've got friends who are at that stage sort of now, they're way more willing to play and tinker and I'm just going to do this and this weekend I'm going to do this, and it's sort of it's frustrating time because you feel like, if only I had this money, I'd do this or do this, and you're forced to go to the wrecker and you're forced to scavenge parts from here and there. But what a glorious time that is.
Absolutely.
The resourcefulness of being a young car enthusiast, not so much today because it's impossible to be resourceful now with cars. Like you can't. To many of the kids who are my age, the age I was when I was playing with my 124. Kids that age today are playing with cars you can't really play with. They're just driving them. You're not fixing them that much. I'm generalising a little
and
bit.
You're right. I mean, they're a hell of a lot more complex and computer-driven and
not
all
to
of
mention that the kind of cars that you can tinker with are monetarily out of reach of the average 20-year-old.
Yeah.
Everything old's become expensive.
Having said that, like David and I, maybe we've never grown up, but we spend a lot of time at the wrecker.
Yeah.
And
love a good wrecker.
Car wreckers today, and it's funny talking to some of our friends who've never been to a wrecker, and I'm like, we can look at a car and say, like a 90s car, for example, go, There's one of those at that record. You can get the wheels, the wing
And then
mirror,
you can dissect it with your
and you
eyes.
dissect it with your eyes, and you
it's
think,
true.
you know what, that's worth buying because I know that I can get X, Y, and Z from the wrecker.
Ooh,
And you
factory mats too.
factory
Yeah.
mats, and so we might not be doing heads and valve adjustments and all of that real mechanical stuff, but you can still glean a lot of good bits from the wrecker, even if it's like an ECU. Oh, plug and play.
Yeah,
there's one.
it's true,
that
it's
sort
true.
of thing.
Yeah.
And then so the 124 stayed in Perth when I left Perth and came to the eastern states as
You kept it.
as an adult,
Yes.
Adult.
and
You
I
were-
brought my very own Alfasud TI,
Oh,
Ooh.
back to the Sud. Back to where it all started.
a whole circle.
And this is two-door?
Oh yeah, a TI at
Yeah,
1500
Yeah.
with a single carburetor.
Because, and just to, I don't know heaps about them, did they do a 1300 as well?
they did.
Or a 1200?
Yeah, the very, very, very early TIs were small engines.
It's
but
smaller,
the
yeah.
1500
That's
that
as
I
big as
had-
they went.
Yeah, the
Yep.
1500 was
Yep.
was an 81 or an 82,
Mm.
and I had that car for 5 years, and I drove the wheels off it. I think I did something really typical, like 60,000 kilometres in 5 years in this car, and every time somebody looked down their nose at me for having an Alfasud, year by year I could declare its near perfect record of reliability. In fact,
Wow.
till the day that I sold it, the only time it ever left me at the side of the road was a blocked carburetor main jet that I literally unscrewed, blew out, put back in, put the lid back on the air filter, tightened up with the fly nut, and continued.
On we go.
Well, okay. That's pretty good.
That's pretty damn good.
Very
And
good.
it was the beginning of a succession of Alfa Romeos,
Okay.
which has formed my, strange benchmark that I measure everything else by.
But you've always had Alphas, but there's been other things that have,
Oh, my word.
come and gone.
Well, I'll tell you what, you fellows told me that we're going to talk about my car influences.
Mm.
I don't know how many blokes there are out there who've got a wife who would be a car influencer, but I've got
That is rare.
Oh,
That is
yeah.
rare.
And at the time, I'm trying to think when, because it was actually a very fortuitous afternoon. We'd been living in Canberra where I did where I went to university. We came to Melbourne.
Yep.
And one fine afternoon, we were going down Nepean Highway, and we got a red light at North Road, which hopefully many of your listeners will.
Is that next to Tiny
Tiny
Town
Town.
used cars?
Spot on.
Who've only not that long ago
Not long.
No. It was a
gone
landmark.
by the wayside.
Yeah,
it
that's
was a
right.
There's
landmark.
always something nice to look
Yeah.
at as you stop at the
And-
lights there.
And we stopped at the lights. And as I stopped, as you do,
You glance left.
Over. And Sarah had declared to me when she said to me one day, you know what I'd really like a BMW 2002.
See, I love how specific that is.
That is.
Because like some wives or partners might say, I'd really like a BMW one day. I think they're cool.
Mm.
But to say a BMW 2002,
Oh yeah.
very specific.
Well, my dear wife, before I met her, cemented herself to me by telling me that she wrote off her first car, an E12 BMW 528i.
And she said the code
flipping-
E12?
No, she didn't.
Oh, okay.
I'm just telling you what it is.
Yeah.
But she flipped it on its roof and wrote it off.
That's a
I
decent
always
effort.
thought she was
That's
okay.
Decent effort.
Yeah.
But there I am, red light, North Road, gazing over the top of their stock, and what do I see but the turret of a 2002,
Ooh.
Golf yellow.
Oh,
And
Hello?
a day later it belonged to us. That's the very, very
Wow.
abridged version.
nice.
And I remember distinctly that I detested working on it. It was a very good example.
Mm.
It was a 2-owner automatic with lots of documentation and
Yep.
everything that was
So
right.
early car, round tail lights or
No,
later
square
car?
tail
Square
light
tail
car.
lights. Okay.
Yep.
And it is
So
it's
70.
Early 70s.
74. 74.
Yep.
But it is one of the most important cars I've ever owned. And I'll tell you why.
Because...
Tell us why,
Because
Benny.
over the course of a 13-year ownership,
Mm.
this car metamorphosized from a very original automatic, boring ish car
Yeah.
into a 5-speed manual that was powered by a 2.2 litre stroked engine based on an M3 block
Ooh.
Okay.
with Marley pistons and a pair of Weber side drafts,
Yep.
an electronic ignition and a electric fan,
Thermo
outdoors.
fans. Yeah.
Swapped out the 13-inch wheels for 14s, suspension, the whole thing.
And suddenly this is a far cry from old automatic
This is
Tiny
a-
Town, isn't it?
but I destroyed the car's finesse. But as a foolish young idiot, I hadn't noted that yet, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So after 13 years of ownership of this thing, it went off to, I sold it for a shadow of what it owed us.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, when you do that kind of mods,
exactly.
you can't
You're
expect
never
to
gonna
get
that money back.
Mrs. Benny Musu was devastated. Never heard the end of it.
Never heard that.
And on a very, very big fast forward, we recently acquired another
Mm.
one.
Nice.
But we'll talk about that later, maybe. I don't know.
Well, no, I mean, we can touch on it now, but we'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
But yeah, isn't it? People said, and we discussed it with friends the other week, you know, what are cars you'd buy again? And I said, everything I've owned, and there's been a few, I would own again if the right one fell in front of me, you know, because you do develop those soft spots for certain cars, like,
Absolutely.
you know.
And they're so evocative of the memories of that time.
Yeah,
too.
and often they don't live up to it, but, you know, would I own another W108? Yes, you would, you know, if the right one slid into my life,
Well,
okay, you know, you'd never say never. So I think that's great that you've, you know, realised what was right about that car, what was wrong about that Golf yellow car, and then
So on
we
that
come full
point,
circle.
how does it compare to the Golf yellow car? Do you
the one I just acquired?
So we'll touch on that. The one you've just acquired is red, manual,
It's an earlier car, so it has
round tail
tail
light,
lights. It's
2002.
correct. Now, and this is the thing, you know, as a young guy, when I was like a devout Italian car enthusiast. Everything Alfa Romeo did was right, and everything that BMW did was wrong. Okay, so it had this delightful big valved 2-litre engine with a single throat carburetor, which in my
Choking itself.
tiny brain was an absolute, you know, it was just a complete disaster.
It was like
Yeah.
And it
having
had an
COVID, basically.
Let it breathe.
Yeah,
Correct,
absolutely.
right. And
It was in an iron lung.
And that particular car had an automatic gearbox, which even most people was a bit, you know,
Yeah.
it was probably a bit ahead of its time, but just for the sake of selling more cars in America, kind of.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway, when we set out to buy another one, the baseline for the car would be it has to be as original as possible.
Yeah.
And it's one of those types of cars that's never safe from idiots like I was when I was a
Yeah.
kid who think they can make it better.
That's right.
Bigger brakes, bigger engine,
Yeah.
and it ruins the finesse of the car. Starting with, first and foremost, the first thing that every boy racer does is change the steering wheel.
Oh, so it lost that beautiful, great big tiller wheel.
Yeah, and this car we've got now, it has its original wheel. And the thing is about this car, you can't say that BMW 202 in its standard form is an exciting car, because it isn't. But it's a very, very accomplished car, because you drive along in these things and you think about the fact that the design came out of the 60s.
Yeah.
And you think about the type of people that went to go and look at them in showrooms, and you think about the numbers that they were sold in,
Yeah.
and it all makes sense.
That's right.
Because they weren't cumbersome. They were, you know, they've got four-speed gearboxes, right?
Yeah.
And even in those days, Australians could find a place to do 100 kilometres an hour, right?
Easy.
And yet you'd think 4-speed car's going to be such a drag. But this is the thing: if you don't fart around with the exhaust system and ruin it, it's actually not noisy.
It's not that
so
bad.
you can do 110 in 4.
Yeah, it's not droning at
that's
you
right.
constantly.
And it's a pleasure. And you can tool around in the city with the big steering wheel, and it's not heavy.
Yeah.
And the cabin's airy, and one of the great 2002 things is obviously
The
glazing.
glassiness.
Yes.
Yeah.
The ratio of glass to sheet metal
Yeah.
on those cars is phenomenal. You can see out of it, it's comfortable, and you keep reminding yourself how old the design is, and then you remember that BMW are probably responsible for one of the greatest evolutionary lines of cars that started with the 2002 and ended up as the 3 Series.
As the 3 Series.
And even if it's gone a little bit left of centre today, it is still a line of evolution.
Yeah.
The only thing that really changed is what the actual model number was on the boot lid.
That's right.
Yep, exactly right.
But it was a great start.
And I think I love that point you made about the remembering when it was designed and giving it that context with any old car.
That's really
because,
important.
you know, like case in point, last night a friend of mine's recently bought an E30 323i 5-speed manual 1985. Lovely little original car.
Yep.
I had a drive of it last night and I said, geez, it's like a sewing machine. It's silky, but all the same reasons you like that 2002. Glassy, petite, compact. You know, whizzing down the southeastern at 100, I said to the boys, this is a sweet, sweet little car. I said, I would own this. And you think about, how this drives now in 1985 would have been like, wow, compared to a Mazda 323.
Well, a lot of people cite the BMW 700 and the BMW Turbo 2 as the cars that saved BMW. And it's true that they are. But the E30 is the car that made BMW prosper. I mean, I don't know if it was with you I was talking about this, but, the fact that BMW came up with this modular design and gave us a coupe, a sedan, a cabriolet and an estate.
Yep, which we never got officially in Australia, but there's a few running around.
But the bottom line is they did it.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was, this Genesis thing, nobody else was doing that. It was brilliant.
Yeah. Very, very clever. And I love that. I love that context argument because it just makes sense. Like I jumped in a friend's Benz SL, a while back, the R107, 1984. And now that thing, it's spongy seats and it's a bit dinosaur in the handling and what have you. And you think, it drives not as modern as the 80s Benzes. Even though they sold them all through the 80s, that car was a late 60s design.
Exactly.
And you go, for late 60s design, wow, again.
That's astonishing thing.
Yeah.
So let's rewind a bit from the current 2002, and I love that you've come back to that. It's full circle. Let's rewind back to your cars after the Sud, then came...
The Sud was replaced by a car which I always wanted. I must say, I must have been a pioneer.
I lusted after it.
Everybody thinks that they want one, and everybody wants one, and everybody's got one or something, or found one, or another one's coming.
Yeah.
But I went out of my way to find an Alfa Romeo Giulia Super.
Now, just remind me, Giulia Super, 4-door, quad headlights.
Well, yeah, if you look... People use the term Giulia Super colloquially, but it actually represents one model.
Okay.
If we talk about...
But it's that shape? Correct. Have I got the right shape?
Correct. So if you talk about Giulia saloons, they turned up in 1962. In fact, the launch was at Monza.
Oh.
Wow.
And they
had Cabanieri in the original Italian job.
Now, they were Giulia Supers.
There you go.
Now, this is the police cars?
Yes.
Correct.
Yep, that's what I was about to say next. Are they the police car in the Italian job? Yes, that's the shape I'm thinking.
Indeed.
And it was nothing short of delightful. And it, despite being quite an unoriginal car, so it had typical Alfa Romeo things done to it. And it's funny, we now look at these cars and you'll crawl all over the internet and find one for 100K. And I remember a time when you couldn't pull one to bits quick enough to donate its mechanicals into a coupe.
Yeah, we were just talking about this the other day, how it's so hard to, when you see those prices that they're getting now for things that we got given that years gone by.
And my car had a 2-litre engine where it should have had a 1600.
Yeah.
It had a limited slip differential. They all had 5-speed gearboxes, of course. Because
out of what? Out of other Alfas?
Okay. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It was all plug and play.
Yeah.
But it was a brilliantly engaging car, and you could as easily jump in it and drive it to Sydney as it did, as you could drive it around town.
Beautiful.
And this is the big thing. This is the big Benny Musu bit for me, because it is the one series of car that I can't let go of. Alfa Romeo 105s, 2 big round instruments.
Yeah.
Yep.
A 3-spoke steering wheel.
Yeah.
A relatively long lever, but like spooning honey that's connected to a
on quite an angle in the 105, almost coming out of the dash,
almost Holden Gemini-ish.
A little, it's similar.
Take it easy.
Similar.
And on our right-hand drive cars, that in Australia, our right-hand drive cars have standing pedals that pop out of the floor as opposed to pendants that dangle. With a delightful long travel accelerator pedal. And this, to me, although it might sound like overly romantic kind of verse, the combination of those things has set a benchmark with me for things for something I can't get from anything else. And we'll talk about this, but latterly, in the last decade, my interest in cars and my great passion and my drive to read even more data and consume more information has been shoved along, not by cars I've owned, but cars I've driven.
Yeah.
And I've been, if a kid ever grew up to meet his heroes, I've got to say it might well be me, because I've driven so many cars.
Yeah.
really exotic stuff, and some of the things I even have to kind of wake myself up to remind myself that I'm actually driving it.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is through, you've got a huge network of classic car friends and aficionados and customers and what have you, but also through the Motorists, your YouTube show, getting handed the keys to things that normal people on the street just don't get the opportunity to ever drive.
It's really humbling. I mean, I spend a lot of time with David Belford, who's the other guy. I was going to call him a gentleman, but he's really not.
Funny, he said the same about you.
Yeah, probably did. Yeah.
The other guy. It's like the three tenors, but what is it? Pavarotti and Carreras and the other guy.
The other guy.
No, it's not like that. But you literally, we've giggled about it. To a certain extent, and you never want to be guilty of taking this stuff for granted, because the moment you took it for granted, you would stop being an enthusiast and you'd start becoming something I can't put on this podcast. But when you are given the keys to something, the value is just not important. I've never been interested in values of cars because it's a trivial thing. It's passing.
And I think too much consciousness on that ruins the
experience.
Exactly.
And it's funny because like when I worked at BMW for years, people would often say, "Oh, they're worth so much money." These, and I say, I don't even think about it. Like it's a good car, it's a bad car, it's a good handling car, it's a this, it's a that. But I sort of doesn't. You become very blasé about that and desensitized to that.
Yep.
And in a way, similar to what you're doing with the classics, you drive these things and you're kind of looking at it through a lens of the car, not what the $1 million it might be worth now at Shannon's auctions or
and
something.
And for me, over all of that is the history of, and quite often the genesis of where these things came from. And that struck me most recently. That really struck me when a guy who I consider to be a great pal lent us the BMW M1 to make a movie with, which was humbling and astonishing from the point of view that, I think there's 2 in Australia or something like that.
Yeah.
So
not a lot.
Not a hard car to even go and find, to then ask for, to then be granted permission to
use.
That's
right.
But when you're buckled into this thing and you've got that otherworldly twin cam 6 behind your ears, and you're driving a car that you'd only ever previously seen in books and you'd read plenty about, and you know the genesis of the model, you know the names of the people who developed it, and you think, I'm driving this thing. Better yet, it's actually a pretty good car.
And that's good
that's
because
significant, isn't it?
Careful meeting your heroes, because
exactly,
you can build things up so much in your mind when you finally get to try them, whether it's meeting someone or a car or a house or a holiday destination, whatever it is, and you suddenly experience and go, the dreaming about it and the lusting is often far more, nice than actually getting it.
But do you know something? It was funny because you want to put a full circle on this. About 10 years ago, I finally drove a Dino, right? And since that,
Which is the same as what your dad had?
Yeah.
In Canberra.
So that was my childhood thing,
Yeah, Dino.
Yeah. And that was thanks to Dave, he has been absolutely irreplaceable as a sort of cohort. But away we go in the Dino. And you're almost laughing at this thing because
the pedals are very offset, aren't they?
Yeah, the pedals are offset, and there's a lot of quirky things about it. And you really, other than the fact that the dash is covered in mouse hair, which is really elegant.
Yep.
It's actually mouse hair.
Takes a lot of mouses to hair that dash, I can tell you.
It's from the factory.
Yeah.
We put a few traps, so we trim the dash.
Italian mouse hair.
Yeah.
Nevertheless,
imported.
Indeed.
With the exception of the mouse hair and the curved windscreen, the fixtures and fittings in the car are nothing but fear. They're all plastic. They're all brittle.
Yeah.
The instruments aren't overwhelmingly impressive. There's just a lot of them.
Yep.
And when you bank right and turn left into a fast corner, the carburetors run out of fuel because
so it's a bit
because the centrifugal force is robbing the carburetors of fuel, and it's not very fast. But the steering's delightful. The gear change is sublime, and the sound of the timing gear whirring behind your ears is like something irreplaceable. You can't find that in many cars. It's incredibly tactile, and the view out of the windscreen through the humps that are there.
Yeah, the huge guards. Yeah.
That was a moment as a car enthusiast that you want to write about, or at
Yeah.
least
Yeah.
tell your friends or something.
Come on a podcast and
Or
talk
come
about
on a
it.
podcast.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Great idea.
And then I mean, really lucky, I keep saying that, really lucky, because I'm not really an obtainer. I don't need to own this, that, and everything. But it's these, you drive these things, and there are cars that, you think meeting your heroes can be disappointing. I always blame myself if it doesn't go well, because I'm not working hard enough to do a few Ks or get it right or understand the gearbox.
Yeah.
And I used to think, well, I kind of still think the cars that actually please me the most are the ones that you've got to work the hardest to get right.
Yep.
The ones that
There's more challenge involved, isn't there?
There is, and you'll appreciate this because, you feel quite accomplished as a driver when you work against the odds of the car to keep a car on song and keep it going. A lot of stuff, your twin-cylinder Hondas, Fiat 500s that I've done a lot of Ks in, if you don't drive them properly, or if you don't have some sensitivity towards the fact that they've got basically no torque, you'll always feel like you're going really slow.
Yeah.
But if you do it right,
So you get that
you
sweet
feel
Yeah.
like you are going quick.
Indeed.
You
And
feel like you're going quick.
and that's it's a matter of spending time in these things. I remember a friend of mine, this is a bad example, but I gave him my Land Rover Discovery. He did some work on it, my Series 1 diesel Discovery. And he rang me a few days later and said, that thing's horrendous. It can't get out of its own way. It's so slow. And oh, God. And I said, yeah, I get all that, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but if you live with that car for a week or two and you get to learn where to change gears in it, and it just grows around you, and the rock and roll suspension, and you just kind of get into this groove. And I really enjoyed owning it. I don't still have it, but it was... it's not a car you could jump in, drive around the block, bring back 10 minutes later and say, oh, I get it. You needed to spend more time with it. And there was a reason that, with that, so many Land Rover enthusiasts worldwide just love those things. Yet on paper, it's bad in a lot of ways.
Not to mention the Terence Conran interior.
Terence Conran interior. It was very British at the time.
He got paid a lot of money for that.
It was quite groundbreaking. It was very light. Those Alpine windows. I mean, they were a bit stolen from an old Defender, I suppose.
They were stolen from the Range Rover, weren't they? The doors were Range Rover.
I don't think Rangey did the Alpine windows. It was Defenders.
Oh, the windows.
That had them. Those, the ones
yeah,
that
yeah.
But
to
yeah,
give
you
view of the mountains as you're driving through the mountain range.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
You need time in quirky cars
You do.
on the right roads to get that.
Get that.
Sometimes you don't get it unless you live with it for a bit, and you hear that from motoring journalists a lot.
No, absolutely.
That's
why long-term tests are so popular.
Exactly
when they
right.
Get to
Exactly
live with
right.
the car.
When we got this, I hated this and this. By the end of 5,000 K in
I
a
couldn't
month,
live without it.
That's right.
I want one.
Yeah.
It's that you do get that.
Oh, yeah.
So where are we up to now? We're in the alpha phase.
I think we're almost up to another podcast.
We almost are.
With us.
We almost are.
Oh, come on.
We might have to do an episode 2. So there's been a string of alphas. You've driven a hell of a lot of exotic things, and maybe we can just do a little plug there and say, watch the Motorists on YouTube to see some of these things that Benny's been talking about.
I was just going to say, one of my favourite episodes is the one with the Countach and the Testarossa. Yeah,
What a pair.
David and Ben talk about how you had the Testarossa on your wall, and he had the Countach on his wall as a kid in the bedroom poster.
Which is a dreadful car.
And they spent the whole episode trying to convince each other that theirs was the better car. It was very entertaining.
Yeah.
But
did that car did that car live up to your expectation, the Testarossa?
Well, the Testarossa, it exceeded my expectations.
Wow, that's great.
Because in the great gamut of performance cars that are easy to use, people generally benchmark the good old 911.
Yep.
But the Testarossa, apart from the fact that it's a very, very wide car without very, very big windows, it's actually...
It is a pancake.
But it is a delightful car to drive.
Yeah.
Everything in it works. It's got great steering. It's got a fabulous gear change. It's got an otherworldly engine that makes a noise you couldn't dream of. You can see out of it, which is a big... in the direction you're driving.
That's right.
Not backwards.
It's got brakes and it's got air conditioning. It's fabulous.
Done.
Absolutely.
Just on that point, I thought about it when you were talking earlier about the two-cylinder Honda. Obviously, I've driven plenty of those many, many miles, and I was lucky enough to be offered a drive of a 512 Berlinetta Boxer. And this thing had the heaviest clutch I've ever driven
Oh,
with.
yeah.
You know, incredibly heavy steering. It was the most macho car I've ever tried to drive. I just fell about laughing because it was so like the Scamp in a lot of ways to drive, because it engaged every sense of the body, you know, the vibration, the noise and all that. They were different noises and different vibrations. And in the Scamp, you're busy looking out the rear window to see whose way you've got to get out of, whereas in the Boxer, you're looking as far down the road as you possibly can.
Where can I point this?
But they're both cars that just engage the senses and as you say, just that brings you alive, doesn't it? As an
Same
enthusiast.
skill set, different application.
That's right,
Now,
absolutely.
fast forwarding a little bit, Benny, there is a car that you've owned for a long time that you're probably driving here tonight, I'm guessing.
Oh, that one.
Oh, that one.
It's a very rare car, and it's a bit of a sleeper.
But rarity doesn't count for a thing, because it usually means that when it was new, there was something fundamentally wrong with it, and
Like the
nobody
price,
wanted to buy it.
And in your case, I would suggest it's the
The
price.
price, yeah.
Because in yours is a 2000?
No, 98.
98.
98.
In 1998, if you were, you know, Mr. and Mrs. South Yarra perhaps, you might wander down to a Mercedes-Benz dealership and order a C-Class sedan, or perhaps in your case a C-Class wagon. You know, you would have been offered maybe a C200 wagon. I think there was a C240 wagon.
Yep.
Is that where it stopped, or was there a C280 wagon?
I don't
can't
think they
remember.
made the 280 as a wagon.
They didn't
I don't
do
think
all
so.
the engines in the wagons, because the
That's
wagons in Australia were always a bit
That's
niche.
right.
You know, the European markets love a wagon or an estate, as they
We
call
never
it.
got it here. Australians never.
They didn't
God
ever
bless
get-
us all,
No.
but we just don't
The
understand.
mixture
wagons
of prestige, we understand wagons, but the mixture of prestige and wagon,
and performance.
we
And
don't
going
get that.
fast.
We don't get that.
Performance, yeah.
We don't, a wagon is utilitarian. You put the dog in the back, you go to the beach house. Why would you have a prestige wagon?
Well, that car is actually the current chapter of my Mercedes-Benz story.
Oh.
And my Mercedes-Benz story, in absolute summary,
Summary, yes.
started with a W114
Ooh, a compact.
280
Nice.
Yeah,
With
70s,
with a 5-speed manual box.
which was factory.
Yeah.
Mm, rare.
Mm-hmm.
Aussie delivered car?
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow, that is
York
very
Motors
rare.
car.
Sydney.
That was then supplanted by a fabulous W108 280 SE
Oh, yeah, I remember you had
with
of
one
those.
of my most loved things, mechanical fuel injection.
Yep.
Drove that car
Yep.
every day for a long time, did long road trips in it.
Yeah, beautiful,
Cracking machine.
beautiful looking car.
Correct. That was then replaced with a utterly delightful W124 300 TE twin cam, one of the last ones. Another great car. And then I just literally tripped over this car.
Which is, for the listeners,
A W202 C43
AMG.
AMG. And
And
if-
one of how many in the country, I believe?
Oh, look, just the two. But again, that's
BMW M1, 2.
Two.
Your car,
Yeah.
one of two.
yeah, but doesn't count for anything because they were horrendously. It was the wrong car at the wrong time at the wrong price. Nobody got what it was, and they didn't
Yep.
want to bring anything to Australia, and that
Yep.
was the end of it, right? So let's be honest.
Mm.
There's a reason why there's two. But having said that, if you look at the car, I've now had this car 12 years.
Yeah.
Is that the
And it's-
longest you've had a car?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have done 115,000 of its kilometres.
Yep.
Okay, myself. So I've owned it for over half of its life.
Yeah.
And in what I would consider very endearing way, I can literally list the things outside of the servicing that I've done to it.
On one hand or two hands?
Well, just creeping onto two now.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's pretty damn
That's
good.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
And it has, it is a car which can only be described as an in-house Frankenstein.
Yeah.
It was the first AMG badged model to be made by Benz after the merger, but it was
Yep.
really a pre-merger idea.
Mm-hmm.
It was a parts bin raid. Let's get the smallest body shell we've got.
Mm.
Let's put one of the bigger engines in the car. It'll need a strong gearbox. Let's give it the 600s gearbox. It'll need to stop. Let's get the brakes out of the,
Yep.
the 500s.
Are they Brembo brakes on that?
No, they don't. I think they're ATE calipers
Okay.
with AMG stamped rotors.
Yep.
And the great thing about it is that the M113 V8 in it is a 3-valve V8. It's 4.3 and a bit litres in
Yep.
capacity. It's not that outrageous when you pull it apart and
Yeah.
look at it in cutaway. it produces something over 300 horsepower, but it was actually capable of Euro 3 emissions in 1998. It's very clean. It's pretty economical. It pulls like a train and it revs, which is very, very satisfying. It's got a nice 5-speed automatic gearbox. It's very easy to live with, and I have tried to convince myself to sell it so many times.
But with such a package, why would you? You know, it's the kind of thing you could just keep forever.
Can't. I may well keep it forever.
So what was that? How much more than the C200 wagon was that car new?
I haven't a clue, but I do know. Well, actually, Ed will help us. My car was invoiced for $156,500 in 1998.
Whoa.
And a normal C200 wagon in 98 would have been like 75 or 80.
There you go.
Wow.
You know, somewhere there.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd believe it. And that engine, I had an S430, you know, in 2000, same motor, same box.
And
you know, in an S-Class, bigger, heavier car,
correct.
you know.
And, you know, it's you know, you're not about to go and tell people it's one of the great cars. It's not. It doesn't even have one of the great engines. I think it is really quite accidental, but it is just a very good car.
But it's the sum of its parts, isn't it?
It
comes together.
It's a great car.
And the fact you sort of stumbled on it, and it's very cool. You know, I love that. Yeah. And it's such a sleeper. Like, no one would know other than very rare people like us in the street seeing that what it is.
Yeah,
you know,
that's right.
Actually,
you've got a little old Merc wagon.
It's a silver Mercedes
you know,
wagon.
But it's a delightful thing.
I love it. Well, maybe in the interest of time, we could go on for a long, long time, but we're going to wind it up there.
Yeah, well, winding up.
Maybe you have to come back for an episode 2.
Perhaps.
I think
we would welcome
required, I think.
Benny Musu, thank you very much.
It's been an absolute pleasure, gentlemen.
David, thank you.
The pleasure's been all ours.
Good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Good night.